Hi, now let's talk about California's Consumer Privacy and Enforcement Act. And here I have the voter guide that my son and I went through in detail over the last few weeks and really spent a lot of time on this Proposition 24 right here. And 24 is very important to not only me, but it's important to him because obviously having this device in your hand, as most of you do, if not all of you do, data is being generated all the time. And what has historically been the case is that you have the chance to opt out of certain data collection based on a multi-page privacy agreement that I would venture to say virtually none of you have read. Some basic tenets of this are this, is that we as data generators have certain rights. And GDPR was a stake in the ground in Europe that went into effect a couple of years ago in May that really set the benchmark for data privacy. And it's effectively the basic human right to be forgotten. And there's a whole host of reasons that's important, going back to the happenings of World War II, where personal data was compromised and bad things happened as a result. So some chilling things have happened throughout the course of history based on the loose use and lack of privacy of data. So those are extreme circumstances. Even middle of the road circumstances, data privacy has certain consequences, not only at the meta level, which many say it's a very gray area, and I'll get to that in a second, but actually at individual levels. It affects people's lives. It affects credit scores. It affects how people are marketed to. It affects a whole host of things, and potentially how they're employed or not employed. And I can speak to that in a separate time, but there is a lot of adverse consequences that can ensue. So what do we do? Because it is a very messy field, arguably, and it is something, however, that has to be addressed both legally and ethically. So moving forward, what we're going to have is the ability, per this law, to opt in. Again, the distinction between opting out and opting in is very different. So opting in is essentially you're going to read and understand the consequences and benefits of getting into a certain database. We started with this notion of do not sell my data. Now we're do not share my data without my consent. Now, think about how many times you press I agree, I agree, agree, almost per day now. I was about to say per week, but it happens a lot. And so, are there going to be some foundational elements within that I agree or opt in, whatever it may be, that you have confidence that are going to protect you individually and also protect disenfranchised groups? Because as we collect this data, it can be segmented based on the type of data that is being collected, and then it can be used, and we do not know how it's going to be used downstream. So adverse impact analysis has to be done continuously, which brings me to the next point. This law, this proposition, is going to create an enforcement board. Now, it's one thing to have something on the books. It's another thing to have individuals who are qualified and systems and processes that are qualified to audit what is happening and not happening. So to have this enforcement board put in place is going to be absolutely critical. Obviously, here in California, we have the most prominent and influential tech companies in the world: Google, Apple, Facebook, among many others. So this is going to impact not only the United States, but it's going to impact the world. Now, the good news is, it's my personal belief that the adverse impact economically is going to be negligible. In other words, those companies that I mentioned are not going to have their economics compromised. I don't see that happening. What is going to happen is there's going to be additional investments to ensure data privacy. And there's going to be additional communications, and there's going to be repercussions when these laws are violated. So that will happen. That being said, there's there's a lot less legal filings in the wake of GDPR than I personally had forecast. However, now that this is going into effect in January of 2023, although data collection is going to apply to data collection on January 1st, 2022, so organizations are going to have to prepare pretty much immediately. It's my sense, given the U.S. is the U.S., that there are going to be legal challenges to this law, which I believe is going to be a healthy discussion and hopefully will result in a healthy outcome for the individual. I want to emphasize that we are in a place, and we're going to talk about this momentarily here, we have to have systematic thinking in this process. We can't just have, and by the way, the last count that I saw was 60+% voted yes for this. So it is something that's very near and dear. It's important to people here in California, but I believe it's going to be important to people around the world because the misuse of data has historical precedent, and the ethical appropriate use of data does not get celebrated in the way that it needs to. And that's part of my mission moving forward, is to celebrate the ethical and responsible use of people data and analytics and AI for the benefit of individuals, teams, groups, organizations, and society at large. After all, that's what People Data for Good is all about. So anyway, learn more about it. Obviously, there's a bunch of websites and articles, but I'm going to share some of the my favorite articles in response to this, both leading up to the vote on Tuesday and afterwards, and I'll put my own commentary and the link below. So thanks for joining, and we'll talk more in a minute.